The Effects of Islam and Harari Culture on Harari Women by Harari Freethinkers. Introduction. When men are oppressed, it's a tragedy. When women are oppressed, it's tradition. Letty Cotton Pogrebin. How does Islam and Harari culture affect Harari women? Due to honor culture, religious teachings, and cultural norms, Harari women are repressed in many ways. These elements affect all aspects of a Harari woman's life, from her opportunities, self-image, treatment by others, and legacy. Together, Islam and Harari culture have had, and continue to have, a profound impact on the life of Harari women. Honor, shame, versus dignity culture. In honor cultures, importance is placed on socially conferred worth, reputation, and a positive social image. These attributes can be both granted or taken away by others. Honor is a form of social status founded on the willingness and ability to use force. Honor cultures function through honor codes, either as social practices or ideological constructs, that determine how both men and women should behave to maintain the social reputation of their family. There is a strong connection between honor cultures and violence. Two types of violence can emerge from this concept of honor. The first is the violence between men, where honor is often equated to masculinity. In honor culture, an honorable man will not hesitate to use physical force to combat any assault, theft, insult, or other attempt at lowering his status or his group's. If a man publicly challenges the willingness of another to physically defend himself, to uphold his honor, the man need not beat his opponent. Instead, he must display a willingness to fight him. If he does not, he will be thought to have lowered his social status, honor, and masculinity. This is precisely why Muslims around the world feel personally insulted when someone says or does something they do not like about Islam or Islam's prophet. They feel like it is an attempt by outsiders to lower the status or honor of their religion or prophet. The only way to restore the honor of Islam or its prophet is thus to intimidate or use threats of violence to show one's willingness to fight. Some Muslims go further than threats and commit murder, such as the 2015 Charlie Hebdo terrorist attacks in France. The second type of honor violence is where men beat or even kill their female relatives for loss of chastity or other conduct that threatens male rule. In honor cultures, women are expected to be sexually pure and modest. They must exercise decorum in dress, discretion in social relations, particularly with men, and have restrictions on who they can marry. A woman's sexuality in honor cultures is treated as family property. Men are expected to control the sexuality of women. If a woman behaves contrary to the expectations of the society, it is viewed as a failure of the men. They perceive the actions of women that are outside the accepted norms of the society as a threat to their honor and masculinity. If women do not meet social expectations, the punishment can be severe. This includes efforts to restore the honor of the family. These measures can be termed honor or shame violence and include social isolation, psychological and physical abuse, domestic violence, forced suicide, forced marriage, marital rape, and even murder, honor killings. In contrast, dignity cultures emphasize the context-independent, individual, and inherent worth. This is less affected by the social regard of others. This frees everyone in the society from expectations that restrict their options and choice of actions. Instead of socially mandated behavior, individuals are free to decide for themselves how to behave. In dignity cultures, power is decentralized from being 100% male. The inclusion of women's voices lead to decisions that improve women's lives by acting on what they need and want. The lack of these voices lead to a total and unquestionable acceptance of a man's wants, sometimes at the price of women. Honor culture, misogyny and patriarchy in Islam and Harari culture. A related phenomenon to honor culture is misogyny. Misogyny can be defined as hatred, aversion, or prejudice against women. According to the UN, honor violence represents a form of systematic institutionalized misogyny. When women act in ways outside the expectations of the society, the violence they face is rooted in hatred. Women are only treated well by misogynistic men when they behave as they desire. When they do not, women are confronted with how the men truly feel about them. An example of misogyny is demonstrated by a Muslim woman's experience looking for a husband in the UK. When the woman politely rejected the man because they had different goals in life, he began using derogatory language and threatened to spread false rumors about her. Another example where honor violence is found is when Muslim social media influencers take off their hijab. The abusive reactions from the Muslim community, men and women, are in response to the woman exercising her choice in how she dresses. If a Muslim believes a woman must wear the hijab as an obligation, any Muslim woman who does not, or stops wearing one, is viewed as a transgressor. They are thus deemed as deserving of any abuse such as insults or threats. Honor violence is built on strong patriarchal and heteronormative perceptions. Patriarchy is defined as a method of social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family, the legal dependence of wives and children, and the conferring of descent and inheritance through the paternal line. In essence, the men are superior and the women and children are inferior. Honor culture, misogyny, and patriarchy are thus related concepts. Honor culture segregates social values and behaviors by sex. Patriarchy organizes society by sex. Misogyny is the mistreatment of other human beings of a specific sex, female. All three concepts center on men in positions of power and authority not based on merit, but because of their presence of the male genitalia. In short, in societies with honor culture, misogyny, and patriarchy, men are given the power to influence and control the life experiences of women. This leads to the repression of women because they are not able to live independently or free from the will of men. Both Harari culture and Islam are rooted in all of these phenomena. The Harari use the Arabic word namus to refer to honor and aib to refer to a disgrace. An example of patriarchy in the Harari language is the traditional terms for the families of the husband and wife. The husband's relatives are called relatives of the side of the head, while the wife's side of the family is the relatives of the side of the foot. The head is likely symbolic of being above and superior, mirroring its physical position above the feet. In one of the oldest Harari manuscripts found, dated to the 17th century or perhaps a little earlier, the Kitab al-Fara'id states that all of human knowledge can be reduced to 4 general rules. The first one is: do not trust women. This unwarranted suspicion of all women regardless of character and personal experience is misogynistic because it demonstrates prejudice against women. The Kitab al-Fara'id can be representative of Harari culture since it was a prominent piece of literature. It was read during important ceremonies such as the holy nights of Ramadan. Another example of misogyny happens the moment a Harari baby girl is born. This is because historically, following the Islamic tradition of akikah, when a Harari baby boy is born 2 goats would be sacrificed while only 1 goat is sacrificed for a girl. This clearly demonstrates that a girl's life is not as joyous as a boy's. Because the meat from the slaughtered goat can feed half as many people when a girl is born, the community would naturally be disappointed to hear the birth of a girl because there would be less meat to go around. An example of honor culture is through the Inai Gabudath ceremony of a traditional Harari wedding. This ceremony is a trial of a woman's virginity. The bride is, fallibly, determined to have been a virgin or not based on whether she bled after having sex with her husband. The social worth and reputation of a woman is based on the outcome of this event. If she does not bleed, the society deems she was not a virgin and is punished by a public display of disapproval. Another example of honor culture is the harmful practice of FGM. This practice is conducted in order to control a woman's sexuality by decreasing her sexual desire and ability pre- and post-marriage. While Islam did not start FGM, because it endorses it, the crime is widely practiced across the Islamic world. In Islam, honor culture, misogyny, and patriarchy is clearly demonstrated by the verse 434 of Surah An-Nisa. Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend, for maintenance, from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first, advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and, finally, strike them. But if they obey you, once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. This verse demonstrates patriarchy because the men are said to be dominant over women and are financially responsible for them. Misogynistic honor violence is present in the command to hit one's wife because the husband is instructed to, infantilizingly, punish her through violence if she does not obey. This verse also shows how in marriage, a man and a woman are not equal partners. The man is superior over the woman and treats his wife like an adversary who must be subdued if she behaves in a way he dislikes. This sentiment that a woman is a potential rebel against her master is also present when the Prophet discourages people from inciting a wife against her husband. If a wife does not obey her husband, she is threatened with hellfire. This is because the first things a woman is called to account for on the Day of Judgment are her prayers and her relations with her husband. Thus, wives are forced to appease their husbands out of fear of violence, both in the real world and the afterlife. This treatment is sexually discriminatory because it is not the case with men. Men are not instructed to listen to their wives. Men are not threatened with hell for mistreating their wives. Because men are given the authority to abuse their wife if they simply fear disobedience, the mistreatment of their wife is permitted and will not be punished by Allah. In the 1970s, Harari women were aware that they had to obey their husbands. This is apparent by how they discreetly dealt with disagreements between women and their husbands regarding issues related to Afocha and Baha. Patriarchy is present in Islam also through Prophet Muhammad's comment regarding the prostration of wives to their husbands because they have a special right over them. This unequal status is also evident by the command to wives to mourn husbands for 4 months and 10 days. In that same hadith, the mourning period for everyone else, including a husband mourning his wife, is only 3 days. In another hadith regarding the end of time, it is believed the number of women will greatly outnumber men such that 50 women will be looked after by one man. This paternalistic rhetoric is patriarchal because the women are not treated as adults who can take care of themselves. In patriarchal societies, women are not considered autonomous, self-sustaining adults. Instead, they are treated like children or animals who require a man to oversee their life. Women are also not considered as full human beings since it is believed they are created from a fragile part of a man, his rib. It is very clear that in Islam, men and women are not equal. Men are superior to women. A common verse used by Muslims to assert men and women are equal in Islam refers not to equality of the sexes, but equality of rewards bestowed by Allah. These are two completely different concepts. Honor culture is present in Islam in many other ways as well. For example, the expectation of virginity before marriage and restrictions placed on who a woman can marry. The expectation of modesty in dress in women, and, to a lesser extent, men, is a characteristic of honor culture. The Quran advises men to ensure their wives and daughters are dressed modestly. This is apparent from the following verse of the Quran. O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves part of their outer garments. That is more suitable, that they will be known and not be abused. And ever is Allah forgiving and merciful. This command places men in charge of how women in their family dress. If a woman does not adhere to this standard, the woman is at risk of honor violence because the man is taught to feel as though this is his failure and his masculinity is threatened. The Quran instructs women to dress modestly so it will protect them from being abused by other men. This is an example of rape culture, which will be examined later in this article. There are many examples of misogyny in Islam. For example, Prophet Muhammad's advice to sprinkle water on the urine of a baby boy but wash over the urine of a baby girl. This implies a girl's urine is more unclean than a boy's urine. Another example is how 3 things invalidate prayer in Islam: dogs, donkeys, and women. Even Aisha comments in the Hadith how the Prophet made women at the same level of donkeys. Comparatively, the presence of men does not invalidate prayer. This is why a woman cannot walk in front of someone while they are praying while a man can. In Islam, Allah made women so that they are deficient in intelligence and religion. The rationale is that women have periods and they cannot pray nor fast during this time. Misogyny is also present in Allah's assignments to hell, where the majority are women because they frequently curse and are ungrateful of their husbands. In a list of 7 people who will be shaded on the Day of Judgment, none of them are women. In fact, one of the men is rewarded with shade because he avoided committing sin from the allurement of a woman. In this hadith, women are villainized as a potential source of sin for men. In another hadith, women are declared the most harmful tribulation to men by the Prophet. Prophet Muhammad also included women alongside dogs and houses as the source of evil omens. The perpetuation of honor culture, patriarchy, and misogyny. The greatest threat to extremism isn't drones firing missiles, but girls reading books. Nicholas D. Kristof. Around the world, men in political positions of authority have used women to further their agendas. During the partition of India and Pakistan, one military plan was to remove women from their communities. In 1947, a captain from the al-Nur State Army is quoted as saying, "We took away the women. That was the system." The reasoning behind this is the misogynistic belief that women would adopt the religion of their husband and will pass on the religion to their children because he owns her. After the abduction, some Hindu and Muslim women who had the opportunity to leave didn't want to. This was due to fear of honor violence by their home communities because they were raped. Similarly, between the 13th to 14th centuries in India, over 16,000 women committed suicide to prevent being dishonored by Muslim soldiers. Another example comes from the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood. A focus of their activity is the social control of women through imposing regulations on their behavior. The most obvious example is the imposing of the modern hijab in the 1970s in Egypt. The Muslims manipulated the women's feelings of guilt and fear by blaming them for sinfully seducing men and claiming that without wearing a hijab they would go to hell. This systematic control of women is connected again to honor culture, which is a part of Islam. Women were also targeted because of their critical roles in educating the next generation and perpetuating the existing patriarchal structures. This is why the Quran and Muslims emotionally manipulate women to control their actions, i.e., if they don't obey they will be beaten and go to hell. No woman would freely choose to obey her husband's every wish or wear a hijab if she believed she would not suffer any harm otherwise. Another example of emotional manipulation is if a Muslim woman's parent or husband threatens her if she does not wear the hijab. For example, a parent could tell their daughter that they won't pay for her college education unless she starts wearing the hijab. Such an ultimatum is emotionally abusive because it is an effort to elicit negative emotions in order to coerce the woman to wear the hijab against her own free will. If women are not socially controlled into remaining within a patriarchal, honor-based society, with time, the women will leave because there will be nothing forcing them to stay within such a repressive community. Every woman who leaves is one less woman to have children with, pass on the culture, and continue to grow the community. Strong factors in the perpetuation of these destructive systems are active participation and passive enablement. For example, if one says or acts in a hateful manner towards women because they are women, this is continuing misogyny and its effects. Another example is if one sees a man hitting his wife or harassing a woman because of what she is wearing and does not intervene. Islam itself contributes to the enablement of honor violence by discouraging holding perpetrators accountable. I was a guest at the home of Umar one night, and in the middle of the night he went and hit his wife, and I separated them. When he went to bed he said to me, "O Ashith, learn from me something that I heard from the Messenger of Allah. A man should not be asked why he beats his wife, and do not go to sleep until you have prayed the witr." And I forgot the third thing. A major issue with harmful religious and cultural beliefs is that some believe they cannot be changed. Some may view these systems as just, normal, and natural. This is not true. What is culture today was socially constructed by people and changed over time. The same is true for religion. There is not one Islam. While the Quran and Hadith are shared across Muslims, despite variants, there are many branches of Islam that have formed due to changes in thought over hundreds of years. Each one of them has variations of interpretations that make them different from the others. There are even interpretations of Islam that challenge patriarchy. Similarly, the Harari culture can also challenge the destructive narratives and treatment of women. Therefore, honor culture, misogyny, and patriarchy are perpetuated by manipulating the choice of women, active participation, and passive enablement. Emotionally abusive tactics and false beliefs about their changeability are central to the continuation of these repressive systems. Issues with honor culture, patriarchy, and misogyny for women. Honor-based violence, physical and psychological. In Muslim communities such as the Harari, a woman's worth is directly connected to her adherence to arbitrary religious and cultural rules. If she covers her hair with a scarf, wears long and loose clothing, and prays 5 times a day, she is highly regarded. On the contrary, if a woman does not, she is looked down upon, and may be subjected to public displays of social disapproval through offended looks of contempt, and possibly psychological and physical violence by her family or community. However, the extent of the actions people take in response to a woman's life choices depend on the religiousness of her family and the people around her. Women are targets of these manifestations of anger because when they make decisions that are outside Islam and Harari culture, it is viewed as offensive. Honor culture teaches men that it is an insult to them if a woman does not follow society's rules. Therefore, anger comes from the perception that the woman's action is a personal attack against them. When a man beats or murders a woman, he is often reacting to a perception of threat to his male dominance in the patriarchal society. His reaction is an attempt to regain control of her actions by physically subduing her into submission or eliminating her from existence entirely. The abuse from honor culture, patriarchy, and misogyny on women are very damaging. Physically, emotionally, and psychologically, they can be hurt. Violence against girls and women can cause physical harm and mental health issues including depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The results of oppression can also be unexpressed pain and anger in women. It can be expressed in many ways depending on the woman, her community, and her options. She might despair in self-hatred and pity for her low status. She might ask Allah for sabr, patience, as she deals with having to go against her own desires in favor of the desires of others. Or she might take out her anger by displacing it onto other women through gossiping. In the Middle East, gossip, scandal, and shame are used to control and dominate women, especially daughters and wives. Similarly, gossiping is used as a method of social control among women and men in Harari. Because Harari culture is an honor culture, a woman's reputation represents her value as a human being. If a woman has a negative reputation that is formed by the opinions and potentially incorrect information of others, it can affect her social relationships. Traditionally, Harari women rely on social institutions like afocha. These groups provide social and emotional support for important life events such as weddings and funerals. If a Harari woman is ostracized because of a negative reputation, she can lose the support she needs. If a Harari woman is a mother, she could also take out her anger on her children by beating them. Because patriarchy oppresses women to a status below men, it is only acceptable for her to express her anger towards other women and children. This phenomenon is called lateral violence. The aggressors of lateral violence, if in powerless positions, attempt to gain power through bullying and violence. Similar to honor violence, victims of lateral violence can experience psychological issues including depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress. The majority of Harari women live outside Harari in dignity cultures in the Western world. However, this does not mean they are protected from the religious and cultural violence that can happen within their families and communities. People bring their religious and cultural beliefs with them wherever they live. Honor violence in all its forms represents serious discrimination and violation against human rights. In honor cultures, the socially constructed concept of honor is more important than a woman's life. This is why honor killings exist. In desperate attempts to restore the imaginary concept of family honor, the real life of a woman is stolen from her. These cold and apathetic acts of extreme violence are justified by the perpetrator because according to honor culture, the woman was not following the rules, therefore her life has no value. In honor cultures, a woman is not worthy of living unless she is following the rules. This is why if one reads or hears comments by Muslims about the victims of honor killings, it is common to see them praising the murderer. This sentiment is not just a product of one's ethnic culture. It is also a product of Islam, because Islam too promotes honor culture. It is because of honor culture that Harari traditions like the Inai Gabuta ceremony only punish women and not men. If the results of the ceremony are true and a woman did engage in premarital sex, she likely participated in the act with a man. Though the tradition does not include asking the woman who she had sex with to also punish the man. In Islam, premarital sex is prohibited for both women and men. The reason only women are punished is because she is considered guilty of two crimes. The first crime is zina, Islamically illegal intercourse. The second crime is an honor crime because she acted outside of society's expectation of her virginity. Men are only guilty of zina, and while this is a sin according to Islam, because of patriarchy and honor culture, he is given the authority to act as he wishes without public ridicule. The Islamic crime of zina is left to Allah to punish in a non-Islamic state, while the honor crime of the woman is what the society punishes in both an Islamic and non-Islamic state. Supporters of honor culture and patriarchy might argue that the social control of and dominance over women is necessary for various reasons. However, these social systems are not beneficial to societies. In fact, they are ineffective and destructive. Internalized misogyny. The only way for women to accept traditional Islamic beliefs about women is internalized misogyny. This concept describes the subconscious bias that a woman can have against herself or other women. This bias is learned from the gender roles and stereotypes present in one's society, such as patriarchal societies. If a woman accepts society's assignment of low social value and hatred against women, they can end up hating themselves and other women. When women internalize misogyny, it can appear as minimizing the value of women, distrusting women, and believing gender bias in favor of men. The effects of internalized misogyny can be depression, low self-esteem, eating disorders, and less social support from women. Women who are trained to believe that they are not as important or valued like men may wish they were a boy or prefer to have sons instead of daughters. An extreme result of this is present in Afghanistan. In that country, the freedoms and opportunities that are exclusive to men cause some parents to raise their daughters as boys. This practice is called bacha posh. Hijab. None are so hopelessly enslaved as those who falsely believe they are free. The truth has been kept from the depth of their minds by masters who rule them with lies. They feed them on falsehoods till wrong looks like right in their eyes. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The origins of veiling. In the Quran, women are commanded to dress modestly. Muslims who claim the hijab is a mandatory part of a woman's dress code cite the following verse of the Quran. O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves part of their outer garments. That is more suitable that they will be known and not be abused. And ever is Allah forgiving and merciful. The context of this verse is that it was revealed after Umar saw one of the Prophet's wives, Sauda, urinating or defecating outside at night. Umar called out to her and said, "We have recognized you, Sauda." He then advised the Prophet to order his wives to veil. After he advised the Prophet, the verse was revealed by Allah. Instead of admonishing Umar for calling out his wife publicly while she was discreetly trying to relieve herself, the Prophet didn't say anything to him. The command to veil is thus legislated as a protective measure to prevent men from harassing women. This idea is problematic for many reasons, which are explained in the next section below. The command for veiling is also not for all Muslim women. Veiling is only for free, non-slave, Muslim women. According to the Quran verse 59, chapter 33 of Surah Al-Ahzab displayed above, the reference of being known means being known as a free Muslim woman. Muslim women who were slaves were not allowed to wear the veil. Umar ibn Kitab once saw a slave girl wearing a veil and was outraged. He yelled at her and then hit her with a whip repeatedly on her head until she took it off. The reason the slave girl was whipped was because she was accused of pretending to be a free woman. Not all free Muslim women have to veil. Muslim women who have stopped menstruating and cannot have children do not have to veil. In addition, veiling is only required in the presence of mahram, men a woman can marry. In both of these cases, there is an implication that the veil is used to prevent sexual temptation. The Islamic rationale is that because a woman who is older has no hope of marriage, she should thus not be sexually tempting for men. Similarly, a woman's close male blood relative is not Islamically allowed to marry her, thus she should not be sexually tempting to him. The sexualization of the hijab is further described in the next section. While veiling for women is described in Islamic scripture, this is not the same as the modern hijab. The dangerous connection between hijab and honor culture. Because of the Islamic scripture about veiling, a common belief among Muslims is that by wearing a hijab a Muslim woman is protecting herself against sexual harassment and rape. It is thought that a Muslim woman who has her hair and skin covered is less likely to be targeted over a woman whose skin and hair is. This false belief is problematic because it does not reflect the reality of sexual harassment and rape. Even during the lifetime of the Prophet, the presence of a veil did not deter Muslim men from harassing Muslim women. An example is seen in one incident where Muslim men began to approach the Prophet's veiled wife Safiya before they were told who she was. In reality, there is not a correlation between rape and the presence or absence of hijab. If there was, in Muslim-majority countries the rates of harassment and rape would be zero. But this is not the case. The rate of street sexual harassment of women in the Middle East and North Africa is 40 to 60%. Accurate rape rates in Muslim-majority countries are not known because they are underreported due to many Islamic factors including honor culture, social taboos, and the ineffective Sharia-based laws and legal system. If a woman reports to the police she was raped, she is at risk of being killed because it is seen as dishonor to her family. This means the victim of this violent crime is blamed for the action of a criminal and then loses their life. The socially constructed crime of dishonor is more important than the life of a woman. In many cases, the men who commit these crimes are not punished by local authorities. This perpetuates these sexual crimes because the men are free to rape another woman if he wants. Another issue with hijab is that it promotes rape culture and victim blaming. If a woman is not veiled, a Muslim man can abuse her and use the Quranic verse as an excuse because it warns women that they can be abused if they don't veil. Muslim men are never told by their parents to not rape women. This is because in honor culture, the men are seen as sexual predators who cannot control their desires. Women are told to cover up to protect themselves from men who rape. The result is men who want to rape do so and get away with it. But they do not discriminate between women who wear hijab and women who do not. Men do not care if a woman has a piece of fabric over her hair or not. Sexual assaults such as rape are not actions that are driven by uncontrollable physical attraction or lust. They are violent expressions of hatred toward women and a conscious process of intimidation by which all men keep all women in a constant state of fear. Rape can be defined as a punishment for a woman who dares to exist as an independent being, for one's own purposes instead of the use of others. A similar concept to rape culture is purity culture. Purity culture started as a movement in the 19th century and was based on Christianity. Thus the concept of veiling, which is represented by the modern hijab, endorses victim blaming and rape culture because it forces women to take precaution and accountability for sexual harassment, violence, and attacks they suffer by male perpetrators. The modern hijab also dangerously misguides society into believing sexual crimes occur in public by random, unrelated men. In reality, about 2 out of 3 sexual assaults are committed by someone the victim already knows. In addition, the majority of these sexual assaults, 70%, are committed against children under the age of 17, both female and male. The concept of hijab and modesty also hypersexualizes Muslim women by teaching men that a woman's body is inherently sexual. In this hadith, men are, unnecessarily, warned that the sight of a woman is similar to a devil in that it will cause sexual thoughts. The woman advances and retires in the shape of a devil, so when one of you sees a woman, he should come to his wife, for that will repel what he feels in his heart. The hadith thus portrays all men as potential sexual predators who cannot restrain themselves if they see a woman. They are assumed to not be able to ignore sexual desires, so the only recourse is to relieve themselves in his wife, whether or not his wife is willing to, because she doesn't have a choice. It is ironic how in Islam men are considered the most capable to lead a family and be political leaders, yet cannot control their own sexual desires. Instead, women are instructed to take responsibility and cover their body as much as possible to prevent sexual lust by Muslim men. Any part of a woman that must be covered is referred to as awra. Depending on one's interpretation of Islamic scripture, this could include any body part including arms, legs, hair, ears, neck, ankle, and/or wrists. If a woman's awra is not covered, the fear is that it could induce sexual thoughts in a man, fitna, temptation. This unhealthy sexualization of a woman's body forces men to see a woman not based on her character, but by how she is dressed. This creates the problem of seeing a woman as first and foremost a sexual being. The sexualization of women is clearly demonstrated by Islam's depiction of heaven. Men are rewarded with 72 hur al-ain, which are described in Islamic scripture as beings who are submissive, young, white, large-breasted, eternal virgins. Thus, Islam sexually objectifies women. Sexual objectification of women also exists in Western societies. The difference is that Muslim women are taught that they are desexualizing themselves when they dress modestly. In doing so, they are admitting that their bodies are innately sexual and it is their responsibility to cover it, or else they will be tempting men as a sexual object. If people in any society, whether Islamic or not, are taught that a woman's purpose is for sexual pleasure, this is what they will believe. In reality, sex is simply one action one can do with a woman. Sex is also one action one can do with a man. The possibility of sex with a woman should not define how she must dress, or whether or not she is viewed as a full human being. Modern ideas of hijab. The practice of veiling a woman's hair changed from being a social/cultural symbol to being associated with the religiousness or piety of women. Because Islam is a patriarchal religion where men are in charge of women, the act of wearing or not wearing a hijab became connected to family honor. If a woman does not wear the hijab, it is an insult to the men in her family because it threatens their control over her. The anger towards this disobedience sometimes manifests into violence and even death. These tragic events are called honor killings. In 2022, massive protests of women in Iran erupted against mandatory hijab and high rates of barbaric honor-based violence. The Islamic revivalist movements of the 20th century are slowly escalating the seclusion of women. It is now commonly believed that the hijab is the minimum a Muslim woman should cover her body. Minority or extremist interpretations of the Islamic scripture that believe the niqab are mandatory are slowly making their way into the majority. The differences in opinion of how much a woman should cover is based on the Islamic interpretation of a woman's awra. For example, if one believes a woman's hair is her awra, then she must cover it. If one believes a woman's face or hands is awra, then she must cover them. A famous series of photographs by Bushra El-Mutawakil from 2010 shows progressively concealing stages of veiling. Her work shows how with each step, women and girls become increasingly invisible in public spaces. In the Quran, women are encouraged to stay home. This seclusion of women from public spaces has been previously associated with conservative interpretations of Islam like Salafism. However, it is now not uncommon to see women increasingly covering themselves by wearing the niqab or the burqa in multicultural cities in the West and in some Muslim-majority countries. This trend has been facilitated by preaching of Islamic scholars and social media influencers. The possible future of Muslim women's dress. The current trajectory points to the erasure of the sight of women in public. The next step is to erase women in public entirely. This can happen through discourses that encourage Muslim women to be stay-at-home moms or work from home. This can be achieved in the exact same manner that the hijab was marketed in the 1970s. The act of staying home can be propagated as the most righteous act and best way to avoid sin and hell. Another phenomenon that might occur is Muslim women associating the act of staying home as empowering, as the modern hijab is seen in Western countries. They might start to see staying home as a privilege to aspire to, while ignoring all the disadvantages they face from not participating in the world outside their home. The trend towards staying home will create a world where Muslim women will face limited career options. Muslim women who choose to work outside the home might even be treated with contempt by those who are very religious. They might be viewed as less pious than the righteous Muslim women who stay home. This is similar to how Muslim women's piety is commonly associated with whether they wear a hijab or not. The socialization of hijab. By the definition of a restriction, the hijab is not freeing, it is a limitation. A woman who commits herself to wearing the hijab is limiting the ways in which she can dress herself. She cannot go outside without covering her hair, neck, ears, arms, and legs. She cannot choose to wear shorts or a sleeveless shirt outside. Despite this, some Muslim women who wear hijab believe that they are freeing themselves from Western beauty standards and unwelcome attention that distracts from a woman's personality. There are many problems with these claims. First of all, Western beauty standards are mostly concerned with Eurocentric facial features such as a slim nose, large eyes, and high cheekbones. When a woman wears a hijab, her face is uncovered. Thus, people can still deem if a Muslim woman who wears a hijab is attractive or not, based on these standards. Also important to note is that there is no Western dress code. No one forces women to dress a certain way in secular countries. If a woman wants to wear a short-sleeved shirt outside, she can. If a woman wants to wear a skirt outside, she can. If a Muslim woman tries to claim that in the West women are slaves to Western fashions, they are projecting the limitation that Islam is prescribing onto them. It is Muslim women who are forced to adhere to the Islamic standard of dress, modesty, which is the only way they can dress, or else face the wrath of disobeying Allah. Women in secular countries have a choice to follow fashion trends or not. If they choose not to, there is no punishment waiting for them on earth or in an afterlife. The claim that the hijab and modest dress frees women from unwelcome attention is also problematic. This is because, regardless of how much of a woman's skin is covered, she is still visible to other people. She does not become invisible. People can still find a woman who dresses in this way as physically attractive or even sexually attractive. Also, to hide within modest clothing as a way to prevent comments about one's physical appearance doesn't remove any insecurities one has. The presence of a hijab doesn't make people focus on the woman's personality instead of what she wears, because she is still wearing clothes. People can still make judgments about a woman based on the modest clothing she wears. It is an incorrect assumption that people cannot look past what a woman wears to see her as a human being. It is actually insulting to assume that people, especially men, would be so distracted by the clothes a woman wears that he can only think of her as a sex object and cannot think of her as a human. It is a very primitive way of thinking about how people interact. A piece of fabric that covers a woman's hair doesn't humanize her. Every individual sees other people in their own ways. It is only men who have been taught to see all women as first and foremost possible sexual partners who would be distracted by what a woman wears. Examples of such men are those who were raised as Muslims because, as explained previously, Islam teaches that a woman's body is inherently sexual and must be covered or else it might be tempting to men. Thus, Muslim women must wear hijab to be seen as a human being in the eyes of Muslim men and others who have been taught to see women as inherently sexual. It is only these men who could get so overwhelmed by the sight of a woman's hair and/or shape of her body that he cannot focus on who she is. The reason Muslim women have to care about covering their bodies in the first place is because Islam blames them if they cause sexual thoughts in the minds of men. This is a futile way of thinking because no matter how much a woman covers up her body, she can never stop a man from seeing her in a certain way. A discourse among Harari women is that wearing hijab is akin to a journey. From this perspective, Muslim women believe the most natural, pure, or proper way to exist outside is with a scarf covering their hair. In contrast, to exist without this scarf, it is less desirable and less natural, thus they strive to reach the ideal state of covering themselves. This way of thinking is completely the opposite of reality. Baby girls are of course, not born with scarves on their heads. A woman must first purchase or obtain one and then wrap it around her head. It is thus unnatural to wear a hijab and the natural and default state to not be wearing one. It is because of the socialization of the hijab that leads Muslim women to falsely believe that their natural bodies must be unnaturally and excessively dressed with fabrics to be proper and at its best state. When one does not wear a hijab or takes it off, they may feel guilty because they think they should wear one. The end goal of this journey is to wear the hijab because it is believed to be a religious requirement by some. If a Muslim woman encounters a hijabless woman, they could advise them politely to help them on the path to wearing the hijab. Such an act is infantilizing to women because it assumes they are not acting in their own best interest. A woman who chose to take off her hijab or never wore one at all, used her own intellect to arrive at that decision. To approach a woman and advise her to wear a hijab asserts the woman does not know what is best for her. The rationale by Muslims to defend this approach is that Islam is correct and must be followed. Any perceived action outside of Islam must be corrected to improve the Muslim's religiosity and chance of reaching heaven. The reason Muslims feel compelled to interject their advice onto the decisions of women and men is not an act of goodwill. It is actually a religious obligation. In Arabic it is called fard al-kifaya or communal obligation. Examples of what constitutes such an obligation is the enjoining of good and forbidding evil. What is good in Islam is defined by Islamic scripture. If one believes the hijab is a requirement for Muslim women, advising them to wear the hijab can be thought of as fulfilling a religious obligation. According to the Yaqeen Institute, fard al-kifaya fosters a sense of shared responsibility. Shared responsibility means that if the obligation is fulfilled, by whatever number of moral agents, mukallafin, it takes, all community members are free of the religious responsibility of that obligation. If no one fulfills the obligations, then all members of the particular community will be held accountable. The presence of Muslim women wearing hijab in one's social environment can influence non-hijab wearing Muslim women to wear one too. This was the case of Harari women in Canada. Psychological effects of hijab. Wrapping a hijab on one's head induces the same psychological effects as wrapping oneself with a blanket. Blankets on one's body helps to maintain homeostasis by keeping air movement off the skin and keeping a steady body temperature. The physical pressure and warmth from a blanket also has therapeutic effects such as feelings of comfort, safety, and security. These are the same psychological effects as a hug when the physical pressure of one's arms are around another's body. When a woman continuously wears a hijab, the familiarity of the feeling of it against her head also brings her a sense of comfort and safety. This is because psychologically, familiarity has been shown to be positive and reassuring. When a Muslim woman who is used to wearing the hijab takes it off, it might feel uncomfortable. This is because she is not used to the physical feelings of having her head, ears, neck and hair uncovered when outside. In outdoor settings, natural forces such as wind and sunlight can introduce new, unfamiliar sensations onto these areas. The unfamiliarity can result in feeling uncomfortable and unsafe. This can trigger a desire to put the hijab back on to reduce the natural negative feelings that come with unfamiliarity. Any uncomfortableness may also be due to the association between shame and the hijab. Muslim women are taught that it is shameful if a woman's awra is visible to non-mahram, closely related, men. Thus, if a woman has her hair and/or skin visible for the first time, it may trigger negative emotions such as shame or guilt. In reality, there is nothing shameful about a woman's skin or hair. These are simply elements of how a woman, and all other humans, exist in the world. It is also important to note that unlike other articles of clothing both women and men wear, like shirts and pants, the hijab has no practical function. For example, the thin material of the fabric makes it inadequate to keep a woman warm during cold winters. This leads some Muslim women to wear winter hats on top of their hijab when it's cold outside. The hijab is also not able to keep a woman cool during the summer. This leads some Muslim women to wear a brimmed hat on top of their hijab to keep the sun off of their faces and keep them cool. Hair loss. Based on the way a Harari woman wears a hijab and how she styles her hair underneath, she may experience traction alopecia. This is the loss of hair around a Muslim woman's hairline that can be caused by many factors including the tension placed on the hair. The effects of this are not only cosmetic but also psychological. The distress some Muslim women feel over the loss of their hair has resulted in them seeking solutions on YouTube and medical clinics. Prioritization of marriage and children. In Islam, a woman's role in society is to obey her husband as a wife and bear children. She is not required to, though she can with the permission of men, participate in society in any other way such as having a career, because she is expected to be under the care of her male family members. All of the revered, holy figures in Islam who were women were either relatives of the Prophet or his wives/concubines. In the Harari community, the names of the Prophet's wives were a popular choice for baby girls. These include Safiya, Maria, Aisha, Juwariya, Rayhana, and Maymuna. To become a wife like the Prophet's wives can be seen as an honor. To become a mother is also encouraged because paradise lies beneath their feet. Once a girl is socially determined as old enough, she should marry. The Islamic preference for a wife is a girl who is young and fertile. But this Islamic goal is not even in her control. Women in Islam cannot arrange their own marriage. A woman who does so is disparaged as an adulterer. Instead of actively pursuing the man they want, Muslim women must passively wait until an acceptable man proposes to her. The issue with Islam's focus on marriage and childbirth is that it positions them as the most important parts of a woman's life. To be a wife and mother can be thought of as an achievement. Because Harari culture is an honor culture, a woman's value is dictated by her adherence to social norms. If she does not conform to the norm of getting married and having children, she will suffer social repercussions. Her lack of adherence to social norms can be seen as dishonor to her family. This can pressure women to marry or feel sad if they don't. If there was not cultural and religious pressure to have children, maybe some women wouldn't want to have children. This is what happens in secular countries where there exists a dignity culture. The birth rates in these countries are much lower than in religious nations. If women are free to choose to have children or not, sometimes they choose not to. The reality is that men need women. If there are no women to produce and raise the next generation, the community will no longer exist. Therefore, the continuity of any community always lies with the women, not the men. Because the role of women in Islam is as wives and mothers, women who are not able to have children, because of medical issues or age, can only satisfy one of those roles. In Islam, young women are preferred to older women because they are usually fertile and can produce children for a longer period of their lives. This preference is echoed by one of the Prophet's favorite companions, Umar, who once said a man in a home is better than a woman who cannot bear children. In honor cultures, there is pressure to get married and stay married. Divorce is seen as a failure and is socially disapproved. In Islam, divorce is the most hated permissible act. Muslim women are dissuaded from asking for a divorce unless as a last resort. This toxic attitude encourages women to stay in unhealthy and dangerous marriages for longer than they may wish. It is considered better for them to stay silent in an abusive relationship, have patience, sabr, or ignore their husband's undesirable actions than to leave him and live freely and safely. It might be believed by some that a family with an abusive father is better than a family with separated parents. Because of the social status of being a married woman, even if they are in abusive marriages, they may feel as though it is best to stay. In reality, there are many negative effects of domestic violence on both the wife and children. A study of historical Harari divorce documents show that 11 out of the 13 sampled were divorces initiated by women. A contributing factor was perhaps the fact that men didn't need to go to Sharia court to obtain a divorce. He could do so at his own will. Women who want a divorce cannot obtain one on their own. Her husband has to agree, and the process has to go through Islamic court. Once there, it is the sheikhs, always male, rarely ever female, who will grant her a divorce only if they determine she has a valid case. If the divorce is granted, the woman has to return the mare to her husband. If the divorce is not granted, a woman must remain married to a man she does not want to be married to. If a woman is divorced by her husband through triple talaq and wishes to get back with him, some Muslims believe halala is an acceptable option. This exploitative practice is where a Muslim woman must get married to a random man, have sex with him, and then divorce him in order to marry her first husband. In places like the UK, halala is sold to women in an abusive method that makes it similar to prostitution. Interestingly, in pre-Islamic Arabia, women could initiate marriage, have multiple husbands, polyandry, and divorce at her own will. For example, a woman could turn her tent to signify that she has divorced her husband. Prophet Muhammad outlawed women-initiated marriages and restricted them to monogamy, and Sharia court granted divorce. Thus, contrary to popular belief, before Islam, Arabian women had many rights. In fact, it was because of Islam that those rights were removed. Education, career and finances. Educational attainment. Traditionally, Harari children, both boys and girls, would attend Quran Islamic classes from the age of 3 or 4 and graduate by 10 to 12. They would learn how to read Arabic and Quran, and Harari cultural values. Every day in the late afternoon after Quran girls gather at a home to be taught what it means to be a woman and a good wife. This gathering occurs in a social institution called moigar. This is also where Harari girls learn how to weave Harari basketry, called mote. Girls as young as 7 are allowed to join this group. The girls sell the baskets they make as a means of generating their own income. After graduating from Quran there is an option to learn more about Islam through Kabir Gar. This is where one can learn advanced Islamic topics such as Aqidah, Hadith, Sirah, Fiqh, Tafsir, Qira'ah and Tajweed. Traditionally, these sessions were conducted in the Islamic teacher's home. In the past, women had to sit in a separate room away from the teacher and the men. The women were able to hear the sessions, but could not see the men. Because of this segregation, women were prevented from asking questions. In Harari, it wasn't until the last century that girls were encouraged to also attend secular school. For example, campaigns such as Nesha aimed to eradicate illiteracy among girls and women through offering evening classes. This program improved literacy and increased the education level of Harari women. Increasing education has many positive benefits to the lives of girls. It results in long-lasting impacts on their development and empowerment. It allows women to participate in public life and reduces poverty. It protects them against child marriage, forced marriage, and early pregnancy. The push towards further education for both men and women wasn't Islam. The push came from secular governmental programs. Presently outside of Harari, it is common for Harari women to attend university and achieve successful professional careers. Career options and independence. In Islam, the man in a woman's family must take care of her. While this may sound pleasant to those who like the idea of not having to support themselves, there are issues with this arrangement. For one, Muslim women being dependent on others is the Islamic default. If a Muslim woman is independent, it is only because it is permitted by her father, husband, or other male guardian. If they object, Islamically, she must obey them and not work or continue her education. This means a Muslim woman is not free to be independent of men at her own will. She can only do so if her male guardian allows her. There is no evidence-based reason as to why a woman must be provided for and cannot take care of herself. In reality, a woman, just like a man, is completely capable of earning a living and supporting herself. One can look to non-Muslim majority countries to see examples of women who do not depend on men to pay their bills, clothe and feed them. Even in certain societies that make it difficult for women to work, like Iran, women are not prevented from working because they lack potential. The problem lies with the attitudes of the people and the social structures like patriarchy, honor culture, and misogyny that encourage women to stay home. Given the same opportunities as men, women can achieve everything a man can. The narrative that a woman's place is in the home is destructive because women, just like men, should have the option to choose how to live their lives. The best place a human being should spend their time is not based on their sex, it is based on their interests. If a woman wants to work and spend most of her life dedicated to her career, this is not worse than a woman who stays at home and raises children. Similarly, a man who spends most of his time taking care of his children is not worse than a man who works. Both pursuits are noble causes worthy of anyone's time. The idea of natural or biological gender roles based on sex is an outdated myth that has many disadvantages for both women and men. Based on Islam, if a Muslim woman does work, she can work in any halal profession just like a man. However, according to Islam, her potential in politics is questionable. This is because Prophet Muhammad completely dismissed women working in politics. During the Battle of Al-Jamal, Allah benefited me with a word I heard from the Prophet. When the Prophet heard the news that the people of the Persia had made the daughter of Khosra their queen, ruler, he said, "Never will succeed such a nation as makes a woman their ruler." Harari women have more freedoms than most Muslim women in conservative Islamic societies. They have historically worked selling crops, other goods, or hand-woven basketry, moat. This enabled them to earn their own income and even support themselves and any children after a divorce. Total wealth and access. In Islam, women are sexually discriminated against in matters of inheritance. This comes from the Sharia law that requires women to inherit half the share of men. Muslim apologists will argue that this is not true and say that inheritance is based on responsibilities, not gender. But these responsibilities is the patriarchal requirement that men must take care of adult women. The problem with this is that providing more money to men because it is assumed they will use that money to take care of their female family members is not a guarantee. The extent to which he takes care of his family will vary depending on his own discretion. To assign additional funds, which could amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's world, to men for this reason is sexist and reduces the wealth of women. Contributions and legacy of Harari women. The branch of Islam the Harari traditionally follow is rooted in Sufism. Sufism has historically had a place for women as patrons of religious structures and as religious leaders. They are also venerated as saints just like men. This form of Islam allowed for the acceptance of Harari women as authority figures. One example is the highly revered Saint Ayyubida. Another example is Amatullah the 19th century, who was highly respected as the daughter of a Qadi, Islamic judge, and as a fiqh, Islamic jurist, herself. An oral history of the Siltay people also sheds light into the perceived status of Harari women. It is said that pious Harari women called Gistiach settled in the area and spread Islam. These Harari women are now highly revered by the local people. Harari culture offers women the ability to be involved in societal functions through Afocha women groups. Their main tasks include food and drink preparation for social events such as weddings, funerals, and Quran completion, Kalam Musbar, ceremonies. Unlike other cultures where traditionally the father chooses the name of their baby, in the Harari society, women have a say in this matter. Historically, one method of choosing a baby's name in Harari was a ceremony where the new mother would choose the name from a list of names. Despite the involvement of Harari women in public life, they are still vastly outnumbered by men remembered in Harari history. A contributing factor is how the Harari culture is patriarchal. Men and women take on their father's name, or the name of their ancestral tribal affiliation, as surnames. The passing down of the paternal name is dictated in the Quran. Genealogies are thus traced through the paternal line. This is why Harari families often know the names of more men in their family's history than women. The women's names are not carried down as part of the names of the next generations, so they are eventually forgotten. But even if the names of Harari women are not known, they were still people who existed. They carried, gave birth to, and raised the people who make up the Harari community today. They were people who lived lives, learned, loved, and had dreams. Most of Harari history focuses on male political and religious leaders. Out of all the female Harari rulers in an unverified list, only Anai Dilwanbara binti Mahfuz, Badi Delwambara, is definitely of Harari origin. She became the leader by default because her husband was murdered. Over 500 years of history, Harari had only one female leader. In addition, she didn't earn her position through political strength or the acceptance of women in politics. Her position was the product of circumstance. Luckily, unlike the past, today many Harari women are acknowledged for their achievements and contributions to the community. Conclusion. I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. Aisha, Prophet Muhammad's child wife. Harari women suffer because of honor culture, patriarchy, and misogyny in Islam and Harari culture. Because of these social constructs, the quality, trajectory, and even duration of Harari women's lives are controlled by their society. The women ultimately do not have control over their own lives. The abuse they bear takes a toll on their well-being and the way they see themselves and other women. The modern hijab does not align with Islamic scripture nor history. The garment does not protect women. Rather, it harms them by reinforcing rape culture, victim blaming, sexually objectifies women, and can lead to hair loss. In addition, aside from the perceived fulfilling of a religious obligation, the garment has no practical benefits. The more Harari women are made to cover, the more they will be erased from the world. Marriage and children are central to a Harari woman's place in society. The pressures that encourage marriage can result in Harari women being forced to live in unhappy or even dangerous living conditions. A Harari woman's life choices with regards to her career, independence, and wealth are all limited by Islam. Her potential to be educated is not encouraged beyond Islamic knowledge, because she is not responsible to financially support a family. This mindset equates education and work with solely money and neglects the personal fulfillment and societal contributions they also bring. As such, Harari women are grossly underrepresented in Harari history. However, unlike in other Muslim communities, Harari women have a history of being financially independent and have an active role in social functions. Therefore, the negative effects of Islam and Harari culture on Harari women clearly outweigh the benefits. The problem with following religion and culture is that many primitive and incorrect ideas remain while the world advances. The realities about women, for example, are not reflected in these social constructs because they are man-made and are not based on reason. They were based on superstition, fear, ignorance, and hate. Women are not burdens to protect or hide, sexual objects for pleasure, factories to make babies, dumb, untrustworthy, issues to deal with, or evil sources of fitna leading to men's sin. Women are human beings. They have emotions, preferences, and dreams. Women are inherently valuable and can be just as smart, ambitious, and moral as men, if not more. It must be noted that not all Harari people, or other Muslims in general, sexually discriminate against or abuse girls and women. However, because Islam and Harari culture are the standards in which the Harari community ought to live by, they can drive people to act in harmful ways. This is what leads to the abuse and repression of Harari girls and women by otherwise well-meaning people. As long as Harari women are oppressed by outdated rules and ideas that work against them, they will never reclaim full control over their own lives. Birds born in a cage think flying is an illness. Alejandro Jodorowsky.